The purpose of this video is to provide an introduction for Chapter 4 on forecasting. Before we get started, I want to just quickly go over a couple of administrative things. Just as you'll remember, the test is going to still be on the 2nd of March from 5 to 7 p.m. in 1:37 minute. Take-home tests for that exam will be handed out in class on 23 February, which is a full week before the exam itself. You must be present in class to get the take-home exam, otherwise you have to come by my office and pick one up later. The take-home test or the take-home review must be completed, or you will be asked to leave the test. I will walk around and look at every single person's take-home test, every page, and it has to be complete, or else I will ask you to leave. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Chapter 4, Forecasting. Chapter 4 discusses a large variety of forecasting methods, of which we're going to learn many. But first, before we get too far into all the methods, I want to just talk to you broadly about what forecasting is. So probably of all the forecasting slides I've made in my life, this is my favorite one. Forecasting is defined here as the art and science of predicting the future. And indeed, that's kind of what it is. While we have a lot of mathematical models, ultimately what we are doing is predicting the future using the past data. Sometimes that's very effective, and other times it's not effective at all. So what we have to do is be able to discern between the historical events that do affect us and the historical events that don't affect us. Of course, in this class we don't get all that much into that, but because I'm going to teach you the methods. But what I hope you learn in your time in business is how to weight different factors that might influence demand. Because forecasting, you know, at its very core, all it is trying to decide how many purple, units to stock based on historical demand. So, you're selling coffee at a coffee shop, and how much coffee beans do you need to have on order in order to fulfill all of the demand. You don't want to have too many, because if you have too many, they're going to get old and stale. And you don't want too few, because you don't want to run out and then have your customers go elsewhere. So basically, that's what we're going to learn in this chapter, are some different mathematical models we can use to weigh different factors differently and try to help us get a handle on predicting demand. By the end of this chapter, you ought to be able to define forecasting and understand the different time horizons. We're going to talk about those here in a minute. And then explain the qualitative models. There's about 5 of those, and we're going to talk about those. And then in class, we'll do more of these last 2 things. We're going to apply the naive, moving average, exponential smoothing, and trend methods for forecasting, as well as interpreting a regression and correlation analysis. So we'll spend a fair amount of time on these models, but you have to understand the basics of what is a forecast and why do we care about it first. The first thing we want to do here is define a forecast. So basically, a forecast is just this idea of predicting some future event based on something that had happened in the past. We use forecasts for all kinds of things. I've just listed here production, inventory, personnel, facilities, but the list is endless. So we use past information to predict what will happen in the future. So good forecasts are always able to both predict what's going to happen in the future, and then they're also reconcilable. So we're also able to take a step back and say, wow, our forecast was dead on, or wow, our forecast was way off. Next time we need to do a way better job. Then we have these different time horizons with respect to forecasting. So the first one is short range, so that's up to a year in advance. Generally less than 3 months. We use this type of forecasting for things like purchasing, job scheduling, workforce levels, job assignments, production levels, that sort of thing. Then we have medium range forecasting, and medium range forecasting uses moving average, exponential smoothing, trend, and they look from 3 months to 3 years, and they're really helpful in sales and sales planning, budgeting, marketing, that sort of thing. And then finally, we have these long range forecasts. So these are usually greater than 3 years, and they deal with huge and comprehensive issues that support management. So they run out more than 3 years, and they help us deal with new product planning, facility location, research and development, and on and on. So those are the bigger plans. Now, within the idea of forecasts, we have 3 basic types of forecasts, if you will. So in this class, we're going to be dealing a lot with demand forecasts. That's the 3rd one there. But there are other types of forecasts, and those impact our demand forecasts. So the first one I want to talk about is economic. So when something major happens in the economy or in the United States, when we get a new president, when the president changes rules about things, when the housing starts go up, when the housing starts go down, when interest rates change, all those things, we call them exogenous factors, but they impact our business, and we have to think about those. So we need to be aware of what the forecasts are, the economic forecasts, and how they're going to affect our internal forecasts. Now, another thing we have to keep in mind is technological forecasts. Because as technology changes, that affects our business in many ways. We have to be aware of what sort of technology is being used, how rapidly is it expanding and changing, and we have to integrate these new products and equipment into our service. So those are the 2 external types of forecasts, and then internally are demand forecasts, and these are internal projections for demand, and they can help us with all types of products within our company. And we can forecast for the overall demand or for one particular part of the demand. There's a whole array of ways. But these are the 3 major types of forecasts: economic, technological, and then demand forecasts. Organizations use forecasts for a variety of reasons, some of which are listed here. They take historical data, and this provides a background for strategic decisions that get made. Strategic meaning big things like human resources and other decisions like that. Forecasts are generally mathematical ways to estimate the future utilizing historical data, although they aren't always mathematical models. They are often mathematical models. And good forecasts enable organizations to be able to estimate all kinds of things, capacity, the number of people they need, the number of people, the amount of demand for a particular product within a bigger product line. And they take into account a whole bunch of factors, and they should be pretty good at modeling how many people or how many units we ought to produce. And then they also could use forecasts to monitor how well they're doing in the future. Are they meeting? Are they short? Are they over with respect to demand? So it's always interesting to know what makes a good forecast, and so here are some elements of a good forecast. I think the first one is really important, and that is that they're rarely perfect, because forecasts, by their very nature, they're an art, and we do our best, but they're rarely going to be dead on. Another thing that's important about forecasts is that they decrease in value over time. So if you do a forecast out 10 years, well, the closer you get to 10 years out, probably the less correct you are with respect to your forecast. And you can think about this with respect to weather. Of course, we know that when they forecast the weather for tomorrow, they're usually pretty good. But if they're going out 2 weeks, they don't really know what they're talking about. Now, we also want forecasts to be timely and consistent. So we want them to be done in such a way that we can understand them. And once we really understand them, we don't want them changing the format. So they're done, they're timely, they're reliable, consistent. And then last, you want to have meaningful units, meaning that you need to write it in such a way that the people who are interpreting it really do understand what you're talking about. Because good forecasts are monitored. Very important. Good forecasts are monitored. Again, I'll reiterate this. Good forecasts are definitely monitored. Now let's talk about some particular types of forecasts. So first we're going to talk about these qualitative models. So there's basically these 5 qualitative models that you should be familiar with. The first, the jury of executive opinion. Now this is where a group of people get together that are considered experts and managers, and they discuss qualitative models. Are exactly as the word says, they're qualitative in nature. They don't require a bunch of mathematical computations. So let's start out with the jury of executive opinion. The jury of executive opinion is a group of sort of high-level people, often executives, that considers the opinions of these experts, these executives, and takes into account some statistical models. Ultimately, what they come up with is a pooled opinion, if you will. The Delphi method uses 3 distinct types of peoples. They use decision makers, usually 5 to 10 experts. They use some staff people, and they use respondents. So these are people for whom we value their judgment. So they're not just random customers, they're specific people who know something about the product. So that's a second method. And then another method is the Salesforce composite, where the salespeople get together and sort of provide input on what they think customers want. Some companies go so far as to have what's called a make meeting, M-A-K-E, make meeting, because they say that they're going to be telling the production people what to make, because they have a pretty good idea of what customers want, what's selling, what isn't selling. And then the final model we've all experienced, this is consumer market survey. This is input from customers in the form of surveys and other tools. These models, while they are used regularly, they do have some problems. They often suffer from overly optimistic views of the customer, because the customer doesn't want to say right to the person's face, oh well, you know, this is like really messed up or whatever. So while it's a good idea, it isn't always the best method. So these are the 4 qualitative methods, and then now we're going to change gears and switch over to the quantitative methods. Okay, and finally we're going to talk about quantitative forecasting models. So the majority of this class will be focused on these. We're going to start by talking about the naive forecast model. We'll move into moving average, then exponential smoothing, and then trend projection. So let me just tell you a little bit about these first 4, naive, moving average, and exponential smoothing, and trend. These are all trend series models. They all have the assumption that they're based on time and that the past predicts the future. So we're going to use these models when we think that time is the best predictor of the future. The models on the bottom, linear regression and multiple regression, we use those when we think something other than time might be a better thing to predict the future. For example, we know that over time the demand for business classes is growing. There's no question about that, right? Each semester there are more students in the business program, and so therefore we can pretty accurately say that the demand is growing based on time, right? Time is a good predictor. But if we wanted to look at the demand for snow shovels, then we might find that a better predictor would be the weather. So we wouldn't want to use time, because time, over time, that is not really going to help us. But when there's a bad storm, or when it's really cold or whatever, that's probably a much better predictor of demand. So in that case, we use another factor, not time, to predict demand. So these are the different models that we're going to talk about, and we'll talk about each one in a lot of detail. But for now, I just want you to focus on filling in the first page, well I guess it's actually 2 pages, of your handout, just the information, where you had to define the terms. And then I want you to do the discussion questions as they're written there in the homework section. Here, let me just show them on the board. So for Tuesday, it's important that you have reviewed the information in chapter 3 and you're comfortable with that. I'm not going to spend any more time on that unless you've got questions. So if you ask me questions, I will be more than happy to go over them. You can email to me before class on Tuesday if you want me to go over a problem or whatever. Otherwise, I'm going to just move on Tuesday. So you need to let me know if you need more time on that. And then after that, I would like you to, of course, listen to this video, which you have done or you wouldn't be hearing this, and then do these discussion questions, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, and 9. And so that's a fair game for clicker questions on Tuesday, as are any of the final stuff, the PERT diagram stuff that we did in the last video, that got assigned instead of the snow day. So those would be the two things that you might see for clicker questions on Tuesday. We'll spend a lot of time on Tuesday starting in with the math in chapter 4. It's a lot of fun to do, and you'll find it interesting, I'm sure. So I hope this was helpful and not too long, and we will see you on Tuesday. All right, bye.